Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be covering a topic from Cambridge IGCSE Biology, the topic of characteristics and classification of living organisms and subtopic features of organisms. Now in this particular video we're going to be covering the section on the five kingdoms. So let's talk about the five kingdoms. We've learned that according to the Linnaean system of classification, we first divide organisms into kingdoms. Now, before diving into the five kingdoms, it's first important for all of us to understand that every living organism is made up of cells. Now, the cell is the basic structural unit of life, and every single organism is made up of cells. There are some organisms, the simpler organisms, are made up of just one cells, while the more complex organisms are they have many cells in their bodies. So let's first understand this cell. Now, this is what a typical cell looks like. So in every cell, you will find a cell membrane. The cell membrane is basically a thin membrane that runs around the cell. And you will find a cytoplasm. Now, cytoplasm is basically the fluid that fills up the inside of the cell. The fluid found inside the cell is called the cytoplasm. And also, every single cell that we come across is going to have genetic material, which is usually DNA. So every cell usually would have DNA within the cell. So now that we've got a basic understanding about the cell, let's start with our five kingdoms. So we've learned that according to the Linnaean system of classification, the organisms are first placed into five kingdoms. So here are the five kingdoms. We have animals, plants, fungi, protoctista, and prokaryotes. So when grouping organisms, our first task is to group them and classify them into one of these five kingdoms. So in this video, we're actually going to be taking a look into detail about all of these five kingdoms. So let's first start with our first kingdom, the animal kingdom. All right. So when we talk about the animal kingdom, this is a kingdom that we are very familiar with, right? We know examples of many, many animals, and animals are usually easy to recognize because they are actively moving around and so on. So basically, let's first take a look at the main features of the animal kingdom. First point, they are all multicellular. So multicellular basically means that the bodies of animals are all made up of many cells. They are many-celled organisms. And then their cells contain a nucleus, but no cell walls or chloroplasts. So now what we're doing is we're taking the cell from an animal. If you take any animal and take a cell out of it and observe it under a microscope, this is what an animal cell is going to look like. So let's take a look at the main features of this animal cell. You can see that the cell is having a nucleus, and we know that nucleus holds the DNA. We can see that the cell is having a cell membrane running around the cell. We can see that there is cytoplasm filling up the inside of the cell. Now, when looking at these features of the animal cell, let's note down some important points that you need to notice. You can notice that the animal cell is having a nucleus, and inside this nucleus, you're going to find the DNA, the chromosomes. And another important point to note in this animal cell is that these cells do not have a cell wall. So there's this organelle, this structure called the cell wall, which is present in some cells. So it's important to note that the animal cells do not have cell walls. And also with regard to the organelle called chloroplasts, if you take a look at this animal cell, you can see that there's no such thing called chloroplasts. That's because animal cells do not have chloroplasts. So what exactly is a chloroplast? A chloroplast is basically a tiny organelle found inside some cells, which help those organisms to photosynthesize and produce their own food. So animal cells do not have chloroplasts, and that means they cannot produce their own food. So that's a fact. All animals, they cannot produce their own food. So if animals can't produce their own food, how then do they
Subscribe
get
us
their
now for more
nutrition?
videos and
So here's
content.
how they get their nutrition. They feed on organic substances made by other living things. So these are the main features of the animal kingdom. So now that we are done with the animal kingdom, let's move on to our second kingdom, which is the plant kingdom. So when we talk about the plant kingdom, let's look at the main features. They are multicellular. Once again, all plants are multicellular. The cells contain a nucleus, chloroplasts, and cellulose cell walls. So let's take a look at the details of this plant cell, which is shown over here. We can see that this plant cell has a nucleus, it has a cell membrane, it has a cytoplasm, basically the three important features that were shown in animal cells. And in addition to that, the plant cell also contains this structure called the cell wall, and also these little organelles called chloroplasts. So I'm just going to note that down very quickly. Plant cells have a nucleus, just like the animal cells, they have a nucleus, and they do have a structure called cell wall. And in fact, the cell wall is made up of a material called cellulose. And also with regard to the organelle chloroplasts, chloroplasts too are present. So these are the features, the main features that you need to note about a plant cell. And it's important to know that the cell wall of the plant cell is made up of cellulose. Now, earlier when I was talking about chloroplasts, I mentioned that the function of chloroplasts is to help an organism photosynthesize and produce its own food. So the fact that plant cells do have chloroplasts indicate that plants are able to carry out photosynthesis, and so they feed by photosynthesis. So these are the main features of the plant kingdom. So next, let's take a look at our third kingdom, the fungi. All right, so let's take a look at kingdom fungi. Let's take a look at the main features. So fungi too are usually multicellular. They have cells having nuclei and cell walls not made from cellulose. So let's take a closer look at a fungal cell. When we observe this fungal cell, we can see that the fungal cell has a cell membrane, has a nucleus, and this cell too has a cell wall, but this time the cell wall is made up of a different material called chitin. It has a chitinous cell wall. So let's just note down those important points. The fungal cell too has a nucleus. It has a cell wall, but this time the cell wall is different to the plant cell. It's made up of a material called chitin. And regarding chloroplasts, do you see any structures, any chloroplasts in this fungal cell? No, because chloroplasts are absent in fungal cells. Now, once again, the fact that fungal cells do not have chloroplasts means that they do not photosynthesize. And if they don't photosynthesize, they cannot produce their own food. So how then do they get their nutrition? They get their nutrition by feeding saprophytically or parasitically. So they feed by saprophytic or parasitic nutrition. So this is about kingdom fungi. We're done with that as well. And we're moving on to our fourth kingdom, kingdom Protoctista. Now, when we talk about the protoctists, there are some protoctists that have chloroplasts in them, which are similar to plant cells. And there are some protoctists who do not have chloroplasts within them, which kind of resembles animal cells. So let's take a look at the main features of the protoctists. They are mostly unicellular, but there are some who are multicellular. They all have a nucleus. Some may have cell walls and chloroplasts. So when we talk about protoctists, all of them definitely do have a nucleus. And with regard to chloroplasts, chloroplasts are present in some and absent in some. So the protoctists who do have chloroplasts, they can carry out photosynthesis and produce their own food. But the protoctists who do not have chloroplasts, they feed on organic substances made by other living things. So this is what you need to know, the main features of kingdom Protoctista. So now that brings us to our fifth and last kingdom, which is kingdom, the prokaryotes. So when talking about the prokaryotes, the main features of the prokaryotes is that they are often unicellular. So prokaryotes are often unicellular. They have cell walls that are not made up of cellulose and cytoplasm, but no nucleus or mitochondria. So let's take a look at the diagram of a prokaryotic cell. One thing that you must notice, one of the most important points about the prokaryotes is that the prokaryotic cell does not have a nucleus. Now you can see this very well in this particular diagram. You can see the DNA of this prokaryote is just suspended within the cytoplasm. You don't see any structure called the nucleus, and this is one of the most important features of the prokaryotes. So they don't have a nucleus, they don't have other organelles such as mitochondria, but they do have the cytoplasm, and they might have, some of them have the cell walls and so on. But the most important thing you need to know is that they do not have a nucleus. This is the unique feature of the organisms belonging to this kingdom. So that's about the prokaryotes. That's the most important thing you need to know about them. And that brings us to another this other topic we need to discuss about regarding the viruses. Now, we've all heard of viruses. We know there are viruses that cause certain diseases and so on. So when we talk about viruses, which kingdom do viruses belong to? Now, we've discussed the 5 kingdoms. Which kingdom exactly do viruses belong to? So the answer is viruses do not belong to any kingdom because they are not part of any classification system. So you might wonder why. Why aren't viruses a part of the classification system? So here's the thing. Now, you know, to consider an organism as living, there are 7 basic life processes that it must show, right? Now, when talking about viruses, viruses show only one of these life processes, which is reproduction. So basically, the only thing that viruses can do is they take over a host cell and they make multiple copies of themselves. So basically, out of the 7 life processes, the only life process shown by a virus is reproduction. And that is why we can't really consider it as a living thing. So when taking a look at the virus body, it basically contains the genetic material covered by a protein coat. So that's what you need to know about viruses, and that brings us to the end of this section. All right, so now let's take a look at a few questions from the question bank. So here's our first question. Euglena is a single-celled organism depicted in the diagram below. Which of the following structures would also be found in animal cells? So basically, they're asking you to find the common structures in the euglena as well as in the animal cell. So let's take a look at our 4 answers given here. The first answer is talking about chloroplasts, and we know for a fact that chloroplasts are absent in animal cells. Let's jump on to the third answer. The third answer has to do with a large permanent vacuole, which is also absent in an animal cell. And the fourth answer, once again, has chloroplasts, which we know is absent in animal cells. So our answer is definitely answer number 2. Let's take a look at one more question before wrapping up. So here's our second question. The diagram shows a liver cell, which features are present in this cell and also in most plant cells. So if we talk about a liver cell, we know that this is an animal cell. So they're basically asking you for the structures that are common between an animal cell and a plant cell. So if you take a look at these answers, you will see that the most appropriate answer is answer number 4. Both animal cells and plant cells have cell membranes and cytoplasm. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope all of you have got a good understanding on this topic. So stay tuned to our next video.
Subscribe us now for more videos and content.